Alright everyone, so in this video here, I'm going to be talking about my experience I've had so far when it comes to the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. Now I have both of them disconnected from the TV obviously, because I also wanted to illustrate the size differences between these two. Now, I'm not going to lie, I personally prefer the design of the Xbox. For two main reasons. One is a simpler design. It's not like an in-your-face design that it gets your attention. But then again, that's what Sony went with. They want people to notice it. They want people to see it's like, oh wow, look, that is a PS5. The Xbox is just a thicker box just sitting underneath your TV. Now, I'm lucky enough to have a TV stand that the shelves, even though they can only fit one of these units on each shelf, I can have them laying on its side just fine. Standing up, however, the Xbox is easier. The PS5, you basically have to dedicate a space for it. It's, I'm going to say this. The PS5 in person, I think, looks better than the photos online, but it's so big and cumbersome. And I'm going to get to the cumbersome part in just a minute, but it's so big that you really have to think it out where you're going to be putting this. And being that, you know, the PS5 is so big, I think the majority of the people are going to be laying the system down. Now, unfortunately, there is a problem with this. It is technically possible to have the PS5 standing up, just like this, and without using the stand, but it is recommended that you do use the stand, which does come with the system. It's this thing. Now, because I do use this sideways, you basically have to turn this like this, and then these little notches kind of like presses in from the back. Here's the problem. When it comes time to, like, say like you dust your entertainment center and you want to just remove the stuff, it's quite a bit of a pain in the ass when it comes to moving this thing, because this doesn't actually snap on it. It's just pressed in from these little tabs in the back, and then the system just sits on top. Seriously, that's how it literally sits. And this kind of shows me that maybe Sony went a little too far in designing this thing. They went more for style over practicality. Whereas the Xbox, they kind of went more with practicality over style. And when you look at both of these systems, it's quite clear. Because in order to, say, have the Xbox on its side, you just turn it on its side. There's actually little feet in the back here. There's 4 rubber feet here. And obviously on the bottom, you do have that round ring of rubber that, to be fair, does actually grip. Especially if you use like a glass shelving, it does really grip. And one little nice touch though is the top, even though it's not lit up or anything, but there is like a green, little green plastic underneath it that kind of gives it a cool little effect, which is cool. Now, apart from the physical dimensions, yes, the Xbox is a smaller system, but on paper, it is more powerful. However, in practice, they're pretty much identical. Now, to be fair, this video is being made like a month after these systems came out. So, you know, if you're watching this video a couple years down the line, things might change. However, the one thing that won't change is the game library. Now, as of right now, there isn't really much exclusives on these things. And to be quite honest with you, if you're trying to buy one of these systems before Christmas, well, obviously you're probably not going to get it on time. And two, at least on the Xbox side of things, I think as of right now, the only real exclusive, well, no, that's not true, because that game's also available on PC. The Xbox has no exclusives right now. Well, if you include the PC, it will never have exclusives. If you're talking about strictly on consoles, I think there's only one available right now. And it's not really all that great right now. And it's called Bright Memory. But it is technically a console exclusive. But on the PS5, at least as of right now, there's only 2 exclusives that I'm aware of. And I'll give Sony a lot of props on this. The last time there was a bundle or a pack-in game for a system was the Wii U with Nintendo Land. The PS5 has Astro's Playroom. Even though that's a glorified tech demo for the controller, it's actually a really fun game, and I completely beat the game all the way through, collected all the collectibles, all that good stuff. Really fun game. So even if you buy no other games for the PS5, you at least have one. Now, let's talk about the controllers for these systems. Actually, before we talk about the controllers, let me quickly get into the storage situation. As of right now, the PS5, when it comes to playing PS5 games, you have to use the internal SSD. There is an expansion slot for those high-speed SSD. I think they're called the MEMV or something like that. Basically, those high-speed SSDs for the PS5. Currently, as of right now, that port is disabled, and we're pretty much waiting on those products to start rolling out and for Sony to certify those. Xbox, however, there is a solution for the SSD, and that is this guy right here. This is a 1 terabyte, Seagate made this, but it's a proprietary plug, or the connector is proprietary for the Xbox. This is $220. I'm going to be completely honest, for similar versions that would be theoretically compatible with the PS5, is pretty much about the same price or more for the same size. And I think in this case, when it comes to game consoles, do I think down the line, the way Sony's doing it is going to get cheaper over time, quicker than the way Microsoft does it? Yes, I think these are going to stay in a higher premium price in the long term than the solution that Sony went with. But in terms of ease of use, I think Microsoft did the right thing. But then again, it is proprietary, so being that you're paying money for a 1 terabyte drive that only works on the Xbox Series X and the Series S, and come to think of it, the Series S is $300. This is $220, so $80 more than this. You're getting a full console. SSDs in general, they're just not cheap, so keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to the controllers, let me get the Xbox out of the way, because for the most part, it's pretty much identical to the Xbox One version. It is a little more flat up here, and it does feel a little bit different. They did change somewhat how it forms, especially up here. But for the most part, it's pretty much identical, apart from what I think is a better D-pad and a share button. Besides that, it's pretty much the same. And to be fair, I do like the idea of a drop-in replacement of the console itself, and then that way you don't really have to buy the accessories and extra controllers for it. It all just works on it. So if you're someone that is worried about e-waste and all that stuff, you got to give Microsoft a lot of credit on that, because let's just face it, when it comes to Sony, when it comes to PS5 games, you have to use the DualSense controller. You cannot use the DualShock 4 controller, even though it has the same amount of buttons, same amount of sticks. Yeah, the DualShock 4 doesn't have the haptic feedback and the adaptive triggers on it, but realistically, you know, if you just want to get a second controller and you just have a DualShock 4 controller lying around, why not let people use that? But that's just me. And for the most part, actually, let's go ahead and talk about the DualSense controller, because the Xbox controller is pretty much the same for the most part. Apart from the way it feels in your hand is slightly tweaked and a better D-pad, it's pretty much identical. Which is, don't get me wrong, that's not a bad thing, because I've always preferred the Xbox controller over the PlayStation controller because, well, for one, I just like the layout more. I like the off-center sticks, but that's personal choice. I know plenty of people that do prefer the symmetrical sticks. Now, I will say this, as coming from someone that has never been the biggest fan of the PlayStation controllers, I do have to say this is their best controller ever made in terms of comfort and just how it feels in your hand. It's much more comfortable. It is a little bit of a bigger controller, but it's more ergonomic, and that's something I can appreciate it. Now, when it comes to the extra functionalities that's been added to this controller, it is impressive, but I think it's going to be one of those things where, by the way, the haptic feedback on the controller is pretty much the same technology as in the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con controllers and the Pro controller from Nintendo. It's actually the same company that designed the haptic feedback for this as they did with the Switch. Just a little side note there. But unfortunately, if it's any indication from the Switch, most developers, I think, are not going to really take advantage of that, unfortunately. And that's sad, because the haptic feedback is not a gimmick. It actually does make you feel more immersive in the game. So, like when I originally got the Switch, there was like a Fast RMX, that high-speed racer game. And when you use weapons, you can actually feel the weapon going, flying away from your vehicle, like in the controller, in the Joy-Cons. Really impressive stuff. This can technically do the same thing. Like I said, it kind of comes down to the developers taking advantage of that. But I think the one thing about this controller that more developers are going to be taking advantage of is the adaptive triggers. And the adaptive triggers, I think, is going to be more useful than the haptic feedback in the controller. Now, if you don't know what adaptive triggers are, it has like a built-in motor in the triggers that will either pulsate or tension up the triggers. So one example is, say like if you play Fortnite on the PS5, one of the things that it can do is when you're about to shoot your gun, you can pull the trigger slightly, and there'll be quite a bit of tension there until you pull it all the way to start shooting. So that's just one example. Now, when it comes to online multiplayer games, I personally found that it actually slowed me down versus just turning it off. So I think when it comes to like single player games or non-competitive type games, I think using the adaptive trigger is actually really cool. But if you're someone that plays a lot of Fortnite, Call of Duty Warzone, and things like that, you might want to actually turn those off, because that's actually going to slow you down in terms of response time. So those are my thoughts. My overall conclusion between both of these systems is that this is probably one of the first times in modern gaming that I can actually say you can't really go wrong with either system, with one caveat, and that is how you're going to be playing. If all you care is PlayStation exclusives, you don't care about anything Microsoft does or anything else, get the PS5. If you're looking more at, I want to play large quantities of games for the best value, go with the Xbox. If you don't care about the Sony exclusives, if you want value for your money when it comes to large quantities of games, I would say actually go with the Xbox. Only because for Game Pass. I do subscribe to Game Pass Ultimate, and for $15 a month, I'm not going to lie, it's actually a really, really good deal, and there's a lot of good games on it. And they all play really, really well on it. And to be fair, both systems, capability-wise, they're both almost identical from one another. So I think personally for me, they are both good systems, but like I say before to other people, it comes down to the games, how you're going to be playing them, and what you're really looking for. Now, personally for me, I got the PS5 primarily just for the exclusives. When it comes to third-party games and multimedia and all that stuff, I've always preferred more the Xbox, and that holds true with the Series X. The Xbox Series X, I think, is a better all-round media player than the PlayStation. Even though the apps, when it comes to the streaming services, is virtually identical, there is one particular app that I do use that is only available on the Xbox when it comes to game consoles. So that is something to think of too. So like in my particular case, I use the Spectrum TV streaming app that's available on the Xbox, but it's not available on other devices except Roku. And I think there's like a price battle going on between Roku and Charter or Spectrum. And I think it got delisted, but it's still available on the Xbox. So that is something to keep in mind, that, you know, if you're in one of those cases where you have particular apps that you use, that's something you might want to research first before buying one of these consoles. But truthfully, 90% of the people buying these consoles, apart from the scalpers, of course, but 90% of the people buying these consoles are buying them to play games. And I think both of them are really excellent consoles, but it really does come down to the games. And I'm going to be one of those people that is going to be saying that I want both of these systems to be really successful, because guess what? If Sony constantly just keeps dominating, Microsoft might just like, you know what, let's just get out of the hardware business. Xbox will just strictly be a streaming service, which I'm pretty sure it's going to be like that in the future. You know, at least, 10 years from now, it will strictly be streaming. But what else? But yeah, competition is good. And in terms of hardware, I think they're both really good. And I'm going to say this too. One thing I absolutely love about both of these consoles is they are both whisper quiet. My Xbox Series X has been pretty much quiet. It doesn't really get all that loud, honestly. Same thing with the PS5. The PS5 does get a little bit louder, at least with my particular PS5, but we're not really talking about that big of a drastic difference. So if you normally sit a normal distance away from your TV, you're not going to notice any noises coming from these consoles, except when it comes to the disk drive. The disk drive on the Series X is pretty much, it seems like they're just using the exact same drives from the Xbox One X and the Xbox One S, those Ultra 4K Blu-ray drives. It seems like they're just using the exact same drives because sound-wise, the way the discs are handled and all that, it's pretty much identical. The PS5, holy crap, is that one loud-ass drive. That's actually one of my biggest gripes with the PlayStation 5, is anytime you are using the disc drive, it is stupidly loud. And not only that, to be honest, especially when you have this lying down, trying to put a disc in here, unless you know exactly where to go, but if you don't really use the drive all that often, at least for me personally, it's actually quite common for me to kind of miss where the slot is. So that is something to keep in mind. And if I'm going to be nitpicking now, also is this shiny black. I've never been a fan of shiny plastic on electronics, because if you touch on it, if you blow on it, if dust sits on it and you try to wipe it off, it's just going to scratch it. And this is going to be one of these cases where over time, I know this shiny black here is going to get all scratched up, and it's just going to look even worse. So, and not only that, they put shiny plastic around the ports here. Seriously, Sony? You couldn't make this matte? I mean, here's the thing. Look at this controller. This black they use on the controller, if this was the same plastic as on here, it would be perfectly fine. They made it shiny black. So why is it not shiny here? I mean, it's almost like they had two different teams to design these things. And they were like, okay, one team, the system has to be black and white. No question asked. Design it. Same thing with the controller. All right, the controller's going to be black and white. Design it. And it's like two different teams came up with two different solutions of putting black on the objects. I don't know. That's just a OCD nitpick of mine. Is that the controller is matte black, but the console itself has the shiny black on it. That's just going to look like crap over time. But yeah. But yeah, besides that, in terms of the games, in terms of the hardware, they are both very capable machines for the price point. And I do think, actually I do know these are more capable systems generation-wise when it comes to coming out of new consoles than the PS4 and Xbox One was when those originally came out. Now, are some games already being topped out on these consoles? In some ways, but it's more that the way the games are being coded, it's gonna, I'll just put it this way. It'll be interesting to see what happens after a year or two of these consoles out in the market with newer engines, more efficient ways to code the games and all that stuff. And something Mark Cerny said, being that, you know, these consoles have SSDs, should be fair to know that these games should be getting smaller. And that is something to keep in mind, is the storage size on these consoles and the sizes of these games. Like Call of Duty Warzone, that's like 140 gigs on these consoles. So on the Xbox, you have about 850 or so, give or take, of usable space, while the PS5 you have about like 630. So that is something to keep in mind, because the PS5 total has 825 gigs, versus 1 terabyte on the Xbox. So here's a little example. And this is actually something I'm probably going to contact Xbox about to give them a suggestion, because one thing I actually do appreciate when it comes to the PS5 is installing the games. So anything that is PS4 games can automatically be installed on a USB drive, because it doesn't have to be played on the internal drive, unlike PS5 games. That goes the same thing with the Xbox Series, is that it has to use the SSD, whether it's internal or used in one of these. You can play the Xbox Series games on these things. If you're playing backwards compatible games like the Xbox One or previous Xbox console games, those can actually be ran on USB drives. So that is something to keep in mind. And one suggestion I would give the Xbox team is give us an option. If there is an option, I cannot figure it out yet, but have like the default installation locations depending on if it's an Xbox Series game or not. If it's an Xbox Series game, I want them installed on the SSD automatically. If it's not, if it's like a backwards compatible game, I want those games to be installed on the USB drive. But yeah, that's just a suggestion. But besides that, probably one more thing I'll talk about is backwards compatibility. When it comes to the previous consoles, they're both, for the most part, about 99% compatible. There are a select few of PS4 games that's not compatible on PS5. On the Xbox, it's primarily games that use the Kinect. So any Kinect supported games are not compatible on the series. And that goes the same thing with the Kinect. It just does not work on it. So, and for most people, that's not really going to matter, because who cares about the Kinect? But yeah, besides that, they're both good consoles. I'm actually quite happy with both of them. I do use the Xbox more because of the media aspect of the console. I think it does a better job than the PlayStation does, but that's just me. But yeah, in terms of everything else, I personally haven't really had hard crashes on either systems. Now, when it came to the games, I do play more games on the Xbox, so it's kind of unfair for me to say I haven't had any problems on the PlayStation. But I've also read stuff that people had issues with, and I purposely try to avoid those things. But in terms of overall stability, I haven't had any real issues with either consoles, hardware-wise. I haven't had any of the issues when it comes to the DualSense controller in terms of like sticky buttons or anything. For me personally, they're both solid systems. And if you're trying to get one before Christmas, if you're watching this in 2021, my suggestion is look at what games are available and go from there. But like I said before, if you're not too concerned with exclusives and you just want to pay, say, like a subscription service just to play games, just to play like select curated games on the Xbox or even on the PC or mobile, the Xbox is actually quite compelling in that aspect. But if you're coming from the PS4, PS5 is a solid upgrade. Same thing with the Xbox. If you're coming from the Xbox One, the Xbox Series is a solid upgrade. Now, they both have digital-only versions. The difference is on the PlayStation side, it's the same hardware, except it just doesn't have a disk drive. The Xbox, with the Xbox Series S, there's no disk drive. It's a smaller system, but it's also less capable. It basically has the same CPU, but just a less capable GPU, because that's more of a 1080p and 1440p console versus 4K that these two consoles are trying to push. So when it comes to both of these consoles and selecting which version to choose, that's another story. If, say for example, you're interested in getting the Xbox, but you don't care about having physical media, you just want to do all digital, and you're looking at it more as like a value system, the Xbox Series S is actually a really good choice. It's $300. Yes, it does have less storage, but it's also a smaller system. And I would actually recommend people get that if all you care about is just paying for Game Pass and nothing else. If all you care about is just getting Game Pass and nothing else, the Xbox Series S is actually a really good choice. And personally for me, if it wasn't for having a back catalog of Xbox One games on physical media, I actually probably would have tried to get the Series S just to save a little bit of money. But in terms of value and what you're actually getting, if you're going to be spending the extra $200, the Series X is actually probably realistically the better choice, especially if you get the Xbox Series S and spending another $220 for one of these. At that point, get the Xbox Series X and then maybe wait on getting one of these down the line. And as far as the PS5, like I said before, the only difference between the regular one and the digital only is the digital only doesn't have a disk drive. It's $100 cheaper. So that is something to keep in mind too. If you don't really care about having any physical media, and say like this is going to be your first PlayStation, or you haven't had a PlayStation in a long time, you have no PS4 stuff, you're going in all fresh, and you just want to do all digital, then save the $100, get the digital edition. Realistically, however, I think getting these consoles with the disc drives is going to be cheaper over time, because guess what? Some stores do sales on games on physical media, so you can find deals that way. Now, of course, there is the convenience factor of, not worrying about, taking the disc out of the case, putting the system and all that stuff. But that's more of a nitpick than anything else. But realistically, if someone came to me and told me, hey, I want to get an Xbox Series, which one should I get, the X or the S? I would realistically just tell people, spend the extra money, get the Series X. It's more future-proof, it's more capable, you got the disc drive. And the disc drive does support the Ultra 4K Blu-rays, regular Blu-rays, DVDs, and CDs. The Xbox Series X can still play CDs. So music CDs. And that's part of the reason why when it comes to multimedia stuff, I've always preferred the Xbox, because guess what? You can't really do those things on the PlayStation 5. It can't do music CDs. It can do DVDs, Blu-rays, and Ultra 4K Blu-ray discs also. But yeah, besides that, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much all I have to say in terms of both of these consoles. And I know it's a little long-winded and, a longer video than normal, but I wanted to get into the details and my thoughts on both of these systems. So those are my thoughts. If you have any thoughts about this, leave those comments down below. Make sure you like this video, share this video, hit the red subscribe button to help support my channel. And like always, have a good one. Now it's time to try to put the PS5 back, because that's the worst thing about the PS5 is that stupid stand. Jeez. Such a pompous design.